The Grand Council chamber floated in the darkness above Prime, a massive station that had witnessed 100 years of peace. Inside, delegates from 40 different species gathered for a celebration that happened only once in a lifetime. Holographic banners drifted through the air, displaying the same message in 100 languages. 1 century of harmony. Ambassador stepped onto the central platform, his 4 arms spreading wide in a gesture of welcome. His scales shimmered under the lights as he began his speech. Today marks 100 years since the last human transmission, 100 years since the chaos ended, 100 years since we learned to live without their reckless ambitions pulling us into conflicts we never wanted. The chamber filled with the sounds of approval. Clicks, whistles, and harmonic tones echoed from dozens of different species. The younger delegates, those who had never met a human, nodded along with enthusiasm. The older ones, like the representatives with their ancient eyes, remained quiet but attentive. The humans were brilliant, continued, his voice carrying through the chamber. No one can deny that. They reached the stars in a fraction of the time it took most of us. They invented technologies that impressed even the eldest species. But brilliance without wisdom is dangerous. They fought among themselves constantly. They took risks that endangered entire systems. And in the end, they destroyed themselves in a civil war so terrible that there became a dead zone. He paused, letting the words sink in. We tried to help them. We offered mediation, resources, and guidance, but they refused. They insisted on handling their problems alone. And when the war came, it was so sudden and so complete that within 3 years, every human colony went silent. Earth is now quarantined. No signals come from their space. The humans are gone, and the galaxy has been peaceful ever since. In the back of the chamber, Master Archivist watched the speech with quiet skepticism. She was a species known for their dedication to truth and data. Her 6 eyes moved independently, scanning through holographic files that floated in front of her. She had spent the last 5 years studying human history, and something about the official story bothered her. The numbers didn't add up. Humans had survived ice ages on there. They had endured global wars that should have ended their species. They had fought off diseases that killed millions but never wiped them out completely. They had even survived the journey through space when their early ships were primitive and dangerous. These were not a people who gave up easily. Pulled up a restricted file, one that required special clearance to access. It showed the last known image of Earth, taken by a deep space probe 99 years ago. The planet looked dead, yes, but there was something odd about the energy readings. The surface was cold and dark, but the planet's core showed unusual activity. The magnetic field was stronger than it should be for a dead world. She made a note to investigate further, but she knew her colleagues would dismiss her concerns. The official history was settled. The humans were gone. Everyone had moved on. The celebration continued through the evening. Delegates from different species mingled, shared stories, and made trade agreements. A young species who had joined the galactic community only 50 years ago listened with wide eyes as elder species told stories about the humans. They were crazy, an old merchant said, sipping a glowing beverage. I once saw a human ship fly straight through an asteroid field because the captain said it was faster than going around. Half their crew was screaming, but they made it through without a scratch. Pure luck, I swear. A military officer added her own story. I fought alongside human soldiers once during the border conflicts. They were terrifying in battle, not because they were stronger than us, they weren't, but they never knew when to quit. You could wound them, pin them down, cut off their retreat, and they would still find a way to complete their mission. I respected them, but I was also glad when they were gone. War with humans nearby was inevitable. The young delegate asked the question that many of his generation wondered. What did they look like? The merchant pulled up an old photograph. It showed a human woman in a military uniform standing on the deck of a starship. She was small compared to most galactic species, with smooth skin, bilateral symmetry, and only 2 eyes. Her face held an expression that was hard to read, determination mixed with something else. Maybe sadness, maybe hope. They looked weak, the merchant said. But they weren't. That was their trick. You'd underestimate them and then they'd surprise you. Far from the celebration, in the darkness at the edge of the terminus sector, a monitoring station drifted in the silence. 3 crew members staffed the station, a boring assignment that most considered punishment duty. Nothing ever happened this far out. The terminus sector bordered what used to be human space, but that region had been empty for a century. The technician on duty, a young named, noticed an alert on his screen. Gravitational anomaly detected. He frowned and ran a diagnostic. The sensors were old, probably malfunctioning again. He logged the alert and scheduled a maintenance check for the next shift. The anomaly grew stronger. The station's computers registered the gravitational distortion as equivalent to a small moon appearing from nowhere. Sat up, his mandibles clicking with concern. This wasn't a malfunction. This was real. He opened a communication channel to the nearest defense fleet. Station, Terminus 7 to Fleet Command. We're detecting a massive gravitational event at coordinates. The transmission cut off. Every system in the station went dark simultaneously. Emergency lights flickered on, casting red shadows across the control room. Tried to restart the communications array, but nothing responded. The computers were dead. The sensors were dead. Even the basic life support systems had switched to backup power. His 2 colleagues floated into the control room, confusion written across their faces. "What happened?" one asked. Didn't have an answer. He moved to the observation window and looked out into space. At first, he saw nothing but stars. Then his eyes adjusted to a shadow that shouldn't exist. Something massive blocked out the stars in a perfect circle, as if a piece of space itself had been cut away. "Get the emergency beacon ready," he whispered. Before they could move, the shadow disappeared. The stars returned. And when checked the sensors, now mysteriously working again, there was no trace of anything unusual. The gravitational readings were normal. It was as if nothing had happened. But the station's data core was completely wiped. Every file, every log, every communication from the past year was gone. Only the backup systems remained, and those showed nothing but blank entries for the last 6 hours. Back at the celebration, the party was winding down. Ambassador stood with a group of senior diplomats, discussing trade routes and resource allocations. The humans had controlled significant territory before their disappearance, and that space had been carefully divided among the galactic powers. Everyone had benefited from humanity's absence. "Do you think they're really gone?" a young diplomat asked. Gave her a patient smile. "The evidence is clear. We've sent probes into their territory dozens of times over the years. Every human world is abandoned. Every station is empty. Their ships are derelict or destroyed. Whatever happened to them was total and complete." Master Archivist overheard the conversation and decided to speak up. "With respect, Ambassador, total extinction of a spacefaring species is extremely rare. In the entire recorded history of the galaxy, only 2 species have ever been completely wiped out, and both times it was due to external invasion. The humans had no external enemies strong enough to destroy them entirely." His expression hardened slightly. "Are you suggesting the official history is incorrect, Master Archivist?" "I'm suggesting that the official history is incomplete," replied carefully. "There are gaps in the data, questions that remain unanswered. I simply think it's worth investigating further." "The investigation was conducted 100 years ago," said firmly. "The conclusion was unanimous. The humans destroyed themselves. There's nothing more to investigate." Wanted to argue, but she knew it would be pointless. The galactic community had accepted the story of humanity's self-destruction because it was convenient. It explained their disappearance without requiring anyone to take responsibility. It turned humanity into a cautionary tale instead of a mystery. That night, as delegates returned to their quarters, 3 more monitoring stations at the edge of the terminus sector went offline. This time, the alerts reached Fleet Command before the stations went dark. Admiral, the senior military officer, reviewed the reports with growing concern. 4 stations in one day, all at the edge of what used to be human territory, all experiencing identical system failures before going silent. The statistical probability of this being a coincidence was virtually zero. He ordered a to investigate immediately. 12 ships, heavily armed and equipped with the best sensors in the fleet. If something was out there, they would find it. In her quarters aboard the Council station, Master Archivist couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the stories she'd heard during the celebration. Humans who never quit. Humans who took impossible risks. Humans who survived things that should have killed them. She pulled up another file, this one containing the last transmission ever received from a human source. It was a distress call from Earth, broadcasted on all frequencies exactly 100 years ago. The message was simple: "We're sorry, we tried. Goodbye." She had listened to that message 100 times, and it always struck her as strange. It didn't sound like a species destroying itself. It sounded like a species saying farewell. But farewell to what? Or to whom? She made a decision. Tomorrow, she would request access to the deep space probe data from the quarantine zone around Earth. If her suspicions were correct, there might be clues hidden in the old records that everyone else had dismissed. The galaxy celebrated its century of peace, unaware that everything was about to change. In the darkness beyond their borders, something was moving. Something that had been gone for 100 years. Something that the galaxy had declared extinct. The humans were coming back. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened within 12 hours of the last station going silent. The atmosphere in the chamber was tense, very different from the celebration just 2 days earlier. Delegates spoke in hushed tones, sharing rumors and speculation about what was happening in the terminus sector. Admiral stood at the center platform, his ancient features carved with concern. The lived for centuries and had seen more conflicts than most species experienced in their entire histories. He commanded respect simply by existing. "They arrived at the last known position of Station Terminus 7 6 hours ago," he began, his voice deep and measured. "They found the station intact but completely abandoned. Every crew member was gone. There were no signs of struggle, no evidence of violence, no indication of how or why the personnel disappeared." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Ambassador leaned forward. "Were there any clues, any sensor logs?" "The data cores were wiped clean," continued, "just like the other stations. But this time, I was able to examine the stations more carefully. We found something interesting. The power systems showed a gap in their operational logs, exactly 6 hours where the stations appeared to be running normally, but no data was recorded. It's as if something reached into the systems and selectively deleted specific information." "Pirates," suggested a delegate. Shook his head. "Pirates don't have the technology to wipe military-grade data cores without leaving traces. Pirates also don't make ships and crews disappear without taking anything of value. The stations were left intact. Supplies were untouched. This was surgical, precise, and beyond our current technological capabilities." Master Archivist stood, requesting permission to speak. When nodded, she activated a holographic display that showed a map of the affected region. All 4 stations are positioned along the old border of human territory. They form a line, almost like a perimeter. If I'm right, whatever is doing this is moving inward from former human space toward our core systems. The chamber erupted in debate. Some delegates suggested increased military presence. Others wanted to send diplomatic probes. A few advocated for complete withdrawal from the region until more was known. While they argued, Admiral studied the map with narrowed eyes. He had fought in the border conflicts. that series of small wars that erupted in the decades before humanity disappeared. He knew their tactics, their strategies, their way of thinking, and this felt disturbingly familiar. Humans always scouted before they struck. They gathered intelligence obsessively. They wanted to know everything about their enemy before committing to battle. Taking out monitoring stations and wiping data cores was exactly the kind of preparation a human military force would make before a major operation. But that was impossible. The humans were gone. Before he could voice his concerns, reality itself seemed to tear apart. The first indication was a gravitational wave that hit every sensor in the system simultaneously. Alarms blared throughout the council station. The delegates looked around in confusion as the lights flickered and stabilized. Then the windows of the chamber lit up with light. Hyperspace windows opened across the system like flowers blooming in fast forward. Dozens at first, then hundreds, each one a tier in normal space that glowed with otherworldly energy. Ships emerged from each window, massive vessels that dwarfed anything in the current galactic fleet. The council chamber's central display automatically activated, showing tactical data from the system defense fleet. Contact markers filled the screen. 100 ships, 200, 500. The number kept climbing. Ambassador stood frozen, his four arms hanging limply at his sides. His voice came out as a whisper. How many? A military aide checked the readouts, her face pale. 2,147 vessels, Ambassador, all capital-class warships. Formation patterns they're perfect. I've never seen coordination like this. Admiral moved to the display, his centuries of experience telling him to stay calm even as his heart pounded. He studied the formation, the positioning, the weapon signatures. Then his breath caught. Run a database check, he ordered. Cross-reference those ship signatures with historical records. The aide worked quickly, her hands shaking. A moment later, the results appeared. The chamber went silent. The database flagged every single ship with the same identifier, human origin. But that wasn't possible. These ships weren't in any of the old records. Their designs were similar to human vessels from a century ago, but evolved, improved, refined. The hulls were covered in armor that seemed to absorb sensor scans. The weapons arrays were of a type that didn't exist in the galactic database. The power signatures suggested reactor technology decades beyond current standards. They're blocking every major orbital pathway, a tactical officer reported. They've positioned themselves to control all traffic in and out of the system. They've also locked targeting solutions on every defense platform and military vessel in the system. Another officer added, if they wanted to take this system, they could do it before we could organize a response. Ambassador found his voice. Open a channel, all frequencies. We need to communicate with them immediately. Sir, the communications officer said, they're already broadcasting on every channel. Every frequency, every communication system in this system is carrying the same signal. The central display shifted, replacing the tactical map with a human face. The chamber fell silent. She was middle-aged by human standards, with gray hair pulled back in a military style. Her uniform was dark blue with silver markings that no one in the chamber recognized. Her eyes were hard but not cruel. The eyes of someone who had seen terrible things and survived them. Behind her, the bridge of her ship was visible, sleek, efficient, and filled with technology that looked like it belonged in a museum of future history. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of authority earned through experience, not just rank. This is Fleet Admiral Sarah of the Terran Expeditionary Force. To the Galactic Council and all member species, we bring greetings from humanity. We have been gone for 100 standard years. We apologize for the abrupt nature of our return, but circumstances required discretion during our approach. We have much to discuss, and I strongly suggest we do so quickly. Time is a resource we no longer have in abundance. Master Archivist's 6 eyes were all focused on the screen, her analytical mind racing. The Admiral had said Terran Expeditionary Force, not Earth Defense Fleet, or any of the old human military designations. Expeditionary implied they had gone somewhere. The apology was diplomatic, but the tone was firm. And that last statement, "Time is a resource we no longer have in abundance," suggested urgency. Admiral stepped forward. "I am Fleet Admiral of the Dominion, currently commanding the Galactic Defense Fleet. Admiral, the galactic community believed humanity to be extinct. Your appearance raises many questions." Nodded. "I understand, Admiral, and I promise you will have answers. But first, we need to establish some ground rules. My fleet will remain in position around this system. We mean no harm to any species or vessel in this system, but we will defend ourselves if attacked. We are requesting an emergency session of the full Galactic Council within 24 hours. What we have to share concerns the survival of every species in this galaxy." "Threats will not be tolerated," Ambassador said, trying to sound authoritative even as his voice shook slightly. "This is not a threat," Ambassador replied. "This is a warning. 100 years ago, humanity detected something at the edge of explored space, something that was coming toward the galaxy. We tried to warn the Council. We were ignored, so we made a choice. We disappeared. We went to prepare. Now we've returned because what we warned you about is almost here." "What are you talking about?" demanded. His expression hardened. "The collapse, a phenomenon that consumes entire solar systems and leaves nothing but twisted spacetime behind. It's 3 months from reaching the galactic core. Without preparation, without coordination, every species in this galaxy will be extinct within 2 years. Humanity spent a century preparing to fight it. Now we need you to listen to what you wouldn't hear before." The chamber erupted in chaos. Delegates shouted questions, accusations, and demands. Some called for the human fleet to be destroyed. Others wanted immediate evacuation. A few demanded proof. Admiral raised his hand, and the chamber gradually quieted. He looked at its image on the screen. "You're claiming that humanity abandoned the galaxy to prepare for a threat that no one else can see." "We didn't abandon anyone," said quietly. "We tried to get you to come with us. You refused. You called our data false. You accused us of warmongering. Some of your predecessor governments even tried to seize our research by force. So we faked our own extinction and left. We've spent 100 years in the darkness between galaxies, building the weapons and technology needed to fight something that doesn't negotiate and doesn't stop. We came back because despite everything, we believe the galaxy is worth saving." Master Archivist pulled up restricted files from a century ago, files that required the highest clearance. Her hands shook as she read through diplomatic records from the final years of human presence. There were mentions of a phenomenon, warnings from human scientists, requests for joint research missions, all dismissed. The official records had been edited to remove these details. The story of humanity's self-destruction had been crafted to hide the fact that the galactic community had refused to listen to their warnings. She stood, her voice cutting through the noise. "The records confirm it. 100 years ago, human scientists presented data to this council about a spatial anomaly approaching from outside the galaxy. The council rejected their findings and refused to allocate resources to investigate. 6 months later, humanity went silent." Admiral nodded through the screen. "Thank you, Master Archivist. At least someone did their homework." Ambassador sank into his seat, his scales losing some of their color. His family had been involved in the old council. He had access to the unedited records. He could verify everything was saying, and he knew it would be true. Admiral made a decision. He turned to the council. "We need to hear them out. If they wanted to destroy us, we'd already be dead. That fleet could have taken this system before we knew they were here. They're giving us a choice. I suggest we make the right one." The vote was called. It wasn't unanimous, but it passed. Admiral would address the full Galactic Council in person. As the session ended and delegates rushed to contact their home governments, Master Archivist approached Admiral. "Do you believe her?" she asked. The old warrior gazed out the window at the human fleet, 2,000 ships hanging in perfect formation against the stars. "In my 3 centuries of life, I've learned that humans don't do anything halfway. If they spent 100 years preparing for war, then there's a war coming. Whether we believe them or not might not matter. We're about to find out if we should have listened to them the first time." The human fleet maintained position, weapons charged but not firing, a symbol of power held in check. Inside those ships, humanity waited to see if the galaxy would make the same mistake twice. The Galactic Council would convene in 24 hours. The truth about humanity's disappearance would finally be revealed, and the galaxy would learn that sometimes the dead don't stay dead. Sometimes they come back stronger, wiser, and carrying warnings that can no longer be ignored. The silent century was over. The real test was about to begin. Admiral Sarah stood in the docking bay of her flagship, the Indomitable, watching as a small shuttle prepared for departure. Around her, crew members moved with practiced efficiency, checking systems and running final diagnostics. These were the children and of the generation that had fled Earth, born in the darkness between galaxies, raised with a single purpose. Her second-in-command, Commander James Park, approached with a data pad. "The Council has agreed to your terms. You'll address them in 4 hours. Security is insisting on heavy restrictions." Allowed herself a slight smile. "They're scared, good. Fear focuses the mind." "Do you think they'll listen this time?" "They'll listen. Whether they'll act is another question." She looked out the bay window at the blue-green planet below. Prime, heart of the current galactic order, looked peaceful from orbit. "We gave them 100 years of peace. That's more than we ever got. Now it's time to pay the bill." The shuttle departed, carrying a security detail of 6 Marines toward the Council station. As they flew through the formation of human ships, reviewed her speech one final time. She had practiced it for months, refining every word. This moment would define humanity's place in the galaxy for generations. The council chamber was packed when she arrived. Every species had sent their highest representatives. Additional security filled the galleries. Weapons scanners had been tripled, noticed all of it and understood their fear. Humanity had become a ghost story, and now the ghost had returned with an army. Master Archivist met her at the entrance, her 6 eyes examining with scientific curiosity. "Admiral, I've been studying human history. I have questions." "After the session," promised. "But I appreciate someone doing their research. The truth has been buried long enough." Ambassador called the session to order, his 4 arms gesturing for silence. The chamber quieted immediately. "Admiral, you have requested this emergency session. The floor is yours." Walked to the central platform, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She wore her dress uniform, dark blue with silver stars on the collar. The medals on her chest told a story of battles fought in places these people had never heard of. She stood alone on the platform, surrounded by hundreds of delegates from species both familiar and strange. 103 years ago, she began, human deep space probes detected an anomaly at the edge of explored space. It was moving toward the galaxy at relativistic speeds. Initial scans showed it was consuming everything in its path: stars, planets, entire solar systems. We called it the collapse because that's what it did. It collapsed space-time itself, leaving nothing but gravitational distortions behind. She activated a holographic display that showed the data from those original probes. The images were clear, undeniable. A wave of twisted reality moving through space, devouring everything it touched. "We brought this data to your predecessors on this council. We asked for a joint research mission. We offered to share all our findings. We requested resources to study the phenomenon and develop countermeasures. Do you know what they told us?" The chamber was silent. They said we were lying. They said we fabricated the data to justify military expansion into uncontrolled space. Some governments accused us of trying to trick them into funding human weapons programs. When we insisted the threat was real, we were told that if we wouldn't share our data completely, including classified military information, then we couldn't be trusted. Ambassador shifted uncomfortably. He knew this was true. His grandparent had been part of that old council. The family records were clear. Continued, her voice steady. We tried for 3 years to convince you. 3 years of diplomatic meetings, scientific presentations, and desperate warnings. Nothing worked. Meanwhile, the collapse kept coming. We ran the projections. In 100 years, it would reach the galactic core. We had to make a choice. She pulled up another display, this one showing Earth. But it wasn't the dead world that current records showed. It was a planet in the middle of a massive evacuation. Ships filled the sky, millions of them, lifting off in coordinated waves. We faked our own civil war. We broadcast fake distress signals. We made it look like humanity was destroying itself. And while you believed we were dying, we evacuated every human world, every station, every outpost. 12 billion people loaded onto generation ships and left the galaxy. We went into the darkness, into the void between galaxies where your sensors couldn't find us. The admission hung in the air. A young delegate stood up, her voice shaking with anger. You abandoned us. You let us think you were dead. You didn't want to be saved, replied, her voice hard. You didn't want to hear the truth, so we saved ourselves and hoped we would find a way to save you too. Admiral stood. Where did you go, Admiral? What did you do in the darkness for 100 years? His expression softened slightly. The old deserved the truth, she thought. He had fought alongside humans before. He understood them. We built shipyards in the void, she said. Massive construction facilities hidden in the emptiness between galaxies. We took every resource we had, every ship, every tool, every mind. We pushed our technology beyond anything we thought possible. We tested weapons in places where failure couldn't harm anyone. We simulated battle scenarios against an enemy that didn't fight by normal rules. She pulled up images of the void stations, enormous structures floating in absolute darkness, lit only by human lights. Ships under construction, weapons being tested, entire generations of people living and dying in the service of a single goal. 3 generations of humans were born and raised in those stations, said quietly. They never saw a planet. They never felt sunlight. They grew up knowing that their purpose was to build the weapons and train the soldiers that would one day save a galaxy that didn't want their help. Master Archivist stood, her analytical mind working through the implications. How did you survive? The logistics alone of keeping 12 billion people alive in intergalactic space. We didn't keep all 12 billion alive, interrupted. The admission was stark. We lost 3 billion to accidents, equipment failures, disease, and the sheer stress of living in the void. We made terrible choices about resource allocation. We had to decide who got medical care and who didn't. We watched people die because we needed to save resources for weapons production. The price of our survival was paid in human lives. The chamber was completely silent now. But we survived, continued. We built the ships you see outside this station. We developed technology that can fight the collapse. We created weapons that can disrupt the phenomenon structure. And when we were ready, we came back. Not because we forgive you for refusing to listen. Not because we forgot that you left us to die alone. We came back because someone has to remember that this galaxy is worth saving, even if the people in it don't deserve it. Ambassador found his voice. You speak of this collapse as if it's still coming, but we've detected no such phenomenon. Our deep space probes show nothing unusual. Pulled up a new display. This one showed recent data collected by human scouts over the past month. The collapse had grown larger, more powerful. It was now consuming entire nebulae. The wave front was clearly visible, a line of distorted spacetime approaching the galaxy like a tsunami approaching a shore. "You haven't detected it because you stopped looking," said. "After we disappeared, the galactic community shut down the deep space monitoring programs we had established. You convinced yourselves the threat was never real, but we've been watching it for a century. It's 3 months from reaching the outer rim, 6 months from major colonial systems, 18 months from the core worlds." A military officer stood. "If this is true, why didn't you contact us sooner? Why wait until now?" "Because we needed to be sure we had a solution," replied. "We weren't going to come back and tell you there was a problem without being able to offer a way to fix it. We've spent 100 years developing countermeasures. We know how to fight the collapse, but we can't do it alone. The scale of this threat requires every species, every fleet, every resource in the galaxy working together." Admiral studied the data carefully. His military experience told him was telling the truth. The collapse readings were consistent, the projections were sound, and the human claims were verifiable. He turned to the council. "Send scout ships to confirm," he said. "But proceed as if every word she's saying is true. If she's right and we delay, we lose everything. If she's wrong, we've wasted some resources. The choice seems clear." The debate that followed lasted 6 hours. Species that had feuded for decades argued with each other. Military leaders clashed with diplomats. Scientists demanded more proof. Politicians worried about giving humans too much power. Through it all stood on the platform, answering questions with patience that came from a century of preparation. She provided data, tactical assessments, technology specifications, and strategic proposals. She never raised her voice, never showed frustration, never gave them an excuse to dismiss her. Master Archivist reviewed every piece of data provided. The scientific method was her religion, and she would not accept claims without verification. But as she checked and cross-referenced, everything said held up under scrutiny. The phenomenon was real. The threat was legitimate. The timeline was accurate. Finally, as the debate wore on, a scout ship sent to verify data returned with confirmation. The collapse was real. It was exactly where said it was. It was coming. The chamber fell silent as the scout captain's report played on every screen. Video footage showed the phenomenon in terrible detail, a wall of twisted reality that turned solar systems into gravitational nightmares. Stars that should have been light years apart were compressed into impossible proximity. Planets were stretched into ribbons of matter. The laws of physics themselves seemed to break down at the collapse front. Ambassador looked at the footage, then at the gathered delegates. His voice was quiet when he finally spoke. "What do you need from us, Admiral?" His answer was immediate. "Integration. Humanity will reclaim our old territories, not as conquered space, but as equal partners in the galactic community. We need full access to all military resources, shipyards, and industrial capacity. We need species representatives embedded with human command staff. And most importantly, we need a unified command structure. The collapse doesn't negotiate. It doesn't retreat. It doesn't distinguish between species. We either face it together or we die alone." A delegate stood. "You're asking us to surrender control of our fleets to human command." "I'm asking you to put aside pride and work together," corrected. "Human forces will lead because we have experience fighting in the void, but your input will be valued. Your tactics will be incorporated. Your people will serve alongside ours. This isn't conquest. This is survival." The vote was called at midnight station time. It wasn't unanimous. 3 species abstained, fearing what giving humans power might mean. 5 species voted against, unwilling to trust humanity after a century of absence. But 32 species voted in favor. The measure passed. The Unified Galactic Defense Force was established with Admiral as Supreme Commander. Integration would begin immediately. Technology transfers would happen within days. Training programs would start within weeks. The galaxy had 73 days to prepare before the collapse reached the outer rim. As delegates filed out of the chamber, Master Archivist approached. "I need to see your void stations. I need to document what happened out there. History demands it." Nodded. "You'll have full access, but be prepared. What we did in the darkness wasn't pretty. It wasn't noble. We made choices that will haunt humanity for generations, but we did what we had to do." "All history is like that," replied. "The difference is whether we're honest about it." Admiral waited until the chamber was nearly empty before approaching. The two military officers stood facing each other, veterans separated by species, but united by understanding. "I fought alongside humans in the border conflicts," said. "I know what you're capable of, but I also know that humans can be consumed by revenge. Are you here to save the galaxy, or are you here to prove that we were wrong?" Met his eyes. "Both," she admitted. "We're here to save you because it's the right thing to do, but every human in my fleet knows that your predecessors left us to die. We know we were abandoned. That knowledge will never go away. We'll do our duty, Admiral. We'll fight for this galaxy with everything we have. But don't expect us to forget what happened. Don't expect forgiveness we haven't earned by remembering." Nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Let's save the galaxy first. We can work on forgiveness later." The human fleet remained in orbit around Prime for 3 days, becoming a familiar sight to the billions of people on the planet below. Children pointed at the massive ships. Artists tried to capture their imposing beauty. Military analysts studied their formations obsessively. On the 3rd day, the fleet began to disperse. Ships,